Hello and welcome to Late Fees Waived, the triumphant return of myself, one half of the Brothers Blanchard, the other Blanchards here at the ARK of E. I am Matthew Blanchard. With me, as always, is my brother.
Patrick Blanchard.
And while Gavin and Noah may be the Blanchard brothers and may be the guys who run this place, we were the Blanchard brothers first. So we're the Brothers Blanchard. If you're familiar with us, that means you listen to one of our many mini-series about franchise horror that we did back in 2018.
Yes.
Yes. And we've been talking to Noah repeatedly since 2018, 2019 about doing another series of podcasts. It is 2025. And here we are.
Here we are, getting ready to dive into a whole franchise. Well,
A whole humongous franchise that we're not going to be even able to scratch the surface of, but we're going to do it in a structured way. This may be a little bit different if you're familiar with us. The likelihood that you're familiar with us, given our 7-year absence on the podcast network, is probably slim. But
but
you're
if you are, thank you.
yeah, thank you, thank you. Usually that means we have been back in rotation because it is Arctober, and it is time to dust off the Halloween and the Nightmare on Elm Street podcast series. And we have a show note. We're going to talk about that in just a minute as well. But this is the first of our ongoing podcast that we titled 7 years ago and have been sitting on the title of ever since, Late Fees Waived. Because as we said in our old franchise deep dives, we pay the late fees, so you don't have to. Well, now we're going to be a little more intentional. We're not going to rush like we did back in 2018. We took a viewpoint on franchise horror movies where we dove straight through and we did all the big franchises in the span of about 6 months.
Yes.
But
That doesn't
here,
leave much afterwards.
no, no. And that was part of the reason we disappeared for a little while. We were trying to figure out what to do next. This year provides a unique opportunity, and I think a format that we can use going forward for Late Fees Waived. This year is the year of Superman. With James Gunn's Superman movie coming out in July of this year, we have a unique opportunity to look back and look forward at all things related to the Man of Steel himself. So join us, folks. Buckle in. We are going to be having a year-long conversation. We're going to visit with you probably once a month. We're going to stretch this out. We're going to be a little more intentional. We're not going to do a podcast a week because Noah can keep that pace. I don't know about us.
I mean, some of us are turning half a century this year.
Right? And some of us are, parents and don't have the time to sit and do a podcast recording every week. But what we're going to be talking about today is what brings us to the character of Superman. What is it about Superman on film in particular, on television and in movies, that makes him such a compelling character? And we're going to talk specifically about one Superman movie or one Superman project in every episode. In this episode, we're going to begin with the granddaddy of all Superman stories, Superman the movie. But first, I figure we should intro a little bit about what the character means to us and talk a little bit about the reason why we're choosing 2025 as the year we're going to talk about Superman. So, Patrick, my brother, I have to ask, what's the first introduction point to Superman in your life, and what does Superman mean to you?
The first introduction point of Superman in my life, like many kids from the late 70s, and by kids, I mean I was a kid. Like I was
Right.
born in 75, so I was a kid in the late 70s. My first introduction to Superman is Super Friends Superman. I'm not I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I'm not going to try to be like lofty. No. No, it is that animated Superman. It was my first Superman. Even before Christopher Reeve, because I was 3 when that movie came out. So
Right.
I don't remember it till closer to the time that you were born.
Right. Fair. Me being 5 years younger.
Yeah. And Superman, what does he mean to me? Like, if there was not Superman, comic books would not exist. That's my take on Superman. He is the embodiment of what comic books mean, of what the new American mythology that was sadly lacking is about. Comics and film and cartoons have replaced Hercules and Greek mythology and subsumed the place that American folktales had.
Very true.
Like you can almost see a corollary through the tales of Paul Bunyan into Superman. And there's one particular American folktale that ties directly into a later property involved in Superman with the Superman character of John Henry Irons.
Oh yeah, of course. Steel, as he will come to be known. I don't. Given the structure of what we're talking about, which, uh, well, maybe I'll talk about what my thoughts on Superman are first, but we'll talk about how we might get around to talking about John Henry Irons in a way that he can be brought into the conversation. Because we are going to be focusing on live action Superman,
Right.
film adaptations, both the small screen and the big screen. What Superman means to me, and what my introduction to him is lost in the shadow of time to me, right? Like I don't remember my introduction to Superman because my earliest memories are of being a Superman fan.
Right.
Like I very clearly have an early memory of putting on a cape that our aunt made for her kids, or our great aunt made for our second cousin, um, that tied with a red shoestring, and laying on the floor to pretend to fly while watching Superman. Right. So if I already had access to a Superman cape and I already intended to put it around my neck and I was already pretending to fly, I was already a Superman fan before this earliest memory. But I can tell you that the earliest introduction to Superman, the first Superman I have, is obviously not the Super Friends Superman. My first Superman is Christopher Reeve. And what Christopher Reeve's Superman does is creates this sort of kind of Superman who is above the comics, right? It kind of crystallizes the Golden Age and the Silver Age Superman into this sort of perfect mythological version of Superman and introduces it very plainly to the audience. So I had this sort of like stereotype of Superman, this sort of crystallized perfect version of Superman as my first Superman. It makes it really hard to love other Supermen after, right?
I could totally see that.
Um, in fact, I would say, and this is spoilers for later on in the franchise of our podcast, I would say that Superman, my favorite Superman story, remained Superman the movie until recent years, right? Until it was kind of replaced by Superman and Lois as my favorite iteration of a live action Superman. But
Which could be seen as a out there choice by a lot of Superman fans.
Oh yes, I imagine so. I imagine so. I'll fight you, people. Superman and Lois, so far, best live action iteration of Superman. Tells the most pure Superman story and treats the character the most like his comic book contemporary. Where I want us to talk about the comics as we move through this as sort of a touchstone as we move throughout, which means we're going to be talking about the Superman of the 1970s. We're going to be talking about the Superman of the 1980s as they relate to the Chris Reeve movies, beginning with one we're going to talk about today, all the way to the ending of Superman 4, The Quest for Peace, and then connecting it to sort of our conversations about Smallville that we're going to be talking about. The way through that and the way to kind of connect the comics in, I think we'll get a chance to talk about the 90s of it all, which is kind of its own unique era in Superman comics. We'll kind of talk about that probably if we get around to talking about Lois and Clark, the New Adventures of Superman, and probably during a bit of the Superman Returns conversation, because there's a dead period that I think is going to be rife for conversation from the end of production on Superman 4 to the beginning of production on Superman Returns is a wild ride, and I think that may be an episode unto itself. That may
Bangarian snare beasts,
right? Fiercest killer in the animal kingdom. But the big thing that we're going to be talking about is Christopher Reeve right now. That's where it begins for us. And the reason for this conversation this year is, of course, James Gunn's Superman comes out in July. And we have just had the release of a teaser that features sort of the closest flying shot of the new Superman, following the release of the full-length teaser that just at the end of 2024, basically. So before we dive into Christopher Reeve, what are your thoughts on what we've seen so far? Right, the teaser trailer for James Gunn's Superman, and this flying teaser from premiered during a football game 2 weeks ago.
I really like what I see. I like the fact that it's Superman. There's no debating it. I like that there's a color scheme.
Yes.
I really enjoy that. Mm-hmm. I was on board for this when the announcement was made for David Cornsweet. Is that how you pronounce it? Yeah. Because of his performance in Pearl.
Okay.
I watched that. If you've been a long time listener, or based on what you heard earlier, I really dig horror movies. We did a whole year of franchises. So I dig horror movies. So I watched this horror movie, and I'm like, this guy's awesome. And then this guy's going to be Superman. I'm like, okay, I can totally see this. And with the trailer or the teaser, I'm worried that it may be too inside baseball and jam packed, because there's characters in there that regular folk don't know about, but comic fans do.
Right. Most people don't know who Guy Gardner is.
Correct.
To say nothing of Mr. Terrific.
Exactly. I'm down with it. I'm like, oh, do I get another instance of that I get to live in the visual media of film that I longed for as a 12-year-old comic book fan? Yes.
Right. Yeah.
But I I don't want it to be too much. I don't want everybody to overshadow Superman.
Right. In
Like you
his
can have
first
a
outing.
Batman movie, and I'm fine with Batman being overshadowed by everybody around him because he's Batman. Like
Right.
he'll stand out because he's Batman. Do not overcrowd Superman. Superman is the superhero. Like
Yes.
I said, he's Superman. Like
Yeah.
Superman. He is Superman.
It's right. It's right in the song, as Dick Donner used to say. Um, yes, that's a concern for me as well. And yet, we got crypto. Yeah, crypto. Like actual. I mean, not act. We got an iteration of crypto. Crypto has
Yes.
been represented in the comics by myriad types of dogs. There's some pushback online to this dog because some people think that he should be a large a hound of some kind. Crypto's been all kinds of dogs. Right? I'm unconcerned with what kind of dog Crypto is, so long as Crypto is the goodest boy and has Superman's cape. Like that's all I need.
Yeah.
All right. Well, as this year progresses, as we get closer and closer to July, we're going to talk more and more about the movie as we find out more. Um, I myself was on board, not so much with David Cornsweet because I had very little knowledge of David Cornsweet when he was announced. I have more now. I've looked into the guy because he's playing Superman. But Rachel Brosnahan, having been cast as Lois, was like, okay, that's that's perfect,
Yes.
and that's actually one of the things that I think is really cool about it because I've rarely had an announcement about the casting of Lois Lane strike me right in the feels where I go, that's perfect. She's definitely Lois Lane. Like Terry Hatcher when I was, what, 14? 13.
13.
13, when she was announced and we saw who she was. I was like, yeah, she's a very attractive woman, but I didn't think she's Lois Lane.
Yeah.
Erica Durance in Smallville, same thing. Like every Lois uh, has
Either
not
grows
immediately
into Lois or
exactly
doesn't.
grows into the role or doesn't, but I haven't had the experience of going, no, she's perfect, she's Lois Lane until well
On
one other
casting.
time, but she was animated. On casting, Rachel Brosnahan's she's Lois Lane. Boom, I'm in. 100%. She looks like Lois Lane. I've seen her in other things. She can pull off Lois. I have no qualms about that. The other being Dana Delaney, right? Dana Delaney as the voice of Lois in Superman the animated series. Yeah, Dana Delaney could easily have played Lois Lane had they made a Superman film at the right moment in time, right?
Yes.
Career wise, it would have had to have been, well, basically right around the time Terry Hatcher was playing the role on the small screen. But yeah, I've been in since that moment, and the teaser trailer that really just put it all together. Using John Williams' music the way that they did was awesome, and there's a shot in the trailer. If you're listening to us, this is not a visual medium. I'm sorry, this is an auditory medium. But there's a shot in the trailer where the little girl is standing still with all these things flying at her, about to basically crush her, and Superman just swoops in and shields her with his body. That is the most quintessential Superman thing I've ever seen. Right? And we're going to talk about quintessentially Superman things in
Yeah.
a little bit because there are so many things in Dick Donner's Superman the movie that are just quintessential Superman. But there's nothing more than shielding this girl's body, shielding this girl with his own body. All right, so we will talk more about James Gunn's Superman, and hopefully at some point I'll stop calling it James Gunn's Superman, and we'll just start calling it Superman. Like my brain, I keep calling it James Gunn's Superman because there's Dick Donner's Superman and there's James Gunn's and others in
And
between. I'm
some
not
other ones in
discounting
between.
anybody. I'm not cutting anybody out. Everybody's here. Everybody gets to come to the party and be a Kryptonian.
No, I saw that. That never plays well.
When everybody's a Kryptonian?
Yeah. Except in Superman and Lois.
Yeah. Yep. Well, we will talk about that. We will definitely.
I know. I'm teasing. I'm teasing.
Do it. There is a relatively prescient piece of news that has developed in the last couple of days. Um, the Schuster estate, creators of Superman, Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, the Schuster family estate is suing Warner Brothers, stating that the international rights to the character of Superman have lapsed, thus giving them control of the character and making it so that Warner's does not have the right to release the Superman movie overseas and in Canada. Um, those of you who follow Superman, if you're here because of Superman and not because of the Ark of E or us, which is also possibly likely, this is an old song. Definitely not the first time that the Schusters have sued Warner Brothers over Superman the movie, or over a Superman movie. This is the very first lawsuit related to a Superman movie. Jerry and Joe, who were both still alive in 1978, sued Warner Brothers over the impending release of Superman the movie, and they got a settlement that was not about restoring creative rights to them. What they got was a settlement that gave them royalties on the character that they had not been receiving since the 1940s. But what that left was sort of a murky position where there was afforded to afforded to Joe, not Jerry, the rights to the character of Superboy.
Yes.
Because he had created Superboy after the war and had not just sold the character to national periodicals, what we now know as DC Comics. At the time of his original creation in 1938, Superman was sold outright to national periodicals to appear in Action Comics #1. Jerry and Joe were hired by National to write more Superman because Superman was a huge phenomenon on release in 1938. In a way, I don't think we have anything in our time that explodes into culture the way Superman does in 1938, other than Star Wars in 1977.
Yeah,
I think that's our modern analogy to it, or a modern analog to it. I don't think there's anything since that quite takes the world by storm the way Superman did, the way Star Wars did. So we're back here. We're getting we're at a point where the Schusters want a piece of the pie. When Jerry and Joe got their settlements in 1978, it left doors open, and the Schusters have knocked on that door many times since 1978. They famously sued right when I was about to say the CW, right when the WB was putting Smallville on the air back in 2001 over the rights to Superboy. This is a period in which the show had already taken a policy of no tights, no flight. Tom Welling would not be playing Superboy, he would just be playing Clark Kent. We would never see him I never hear the word Superboy uttered because legally they could not use the name Superboy or the
Yeah.
costume or any of the trappings of that character. And that suit lasted all the way through the first several seasons of production of Smallville into the production of Superman Returns or Superman Flyby, blah, blah, blah. Whatever Superman movie they were making at the time, all the way up until Superman Returns came out. That suit got settled, and they brought another suit in advance of Superman, in advance of Man of Steel. This is what the Schusters do. I'm not going to comment on what it is, what they're doing, but this is not surprising to anybody who has followed Superman or this case, because this case has been dismissed, it has been thrown out, it's been rendered. I'm trying to remember the term, but it's basically it just keeps happening. They keep trying, they keep appealing. They're trying to get control of the character enough that they can sort of cash in on the current success of the character.
And they need to do it quicker because it is getting close to the original Superman being public domain.
Yes, indeed. In the United States, that's anytime we're talking about public domain, it's important to point out in the United States.
Yes.
International copyright runs a little bit differently. In the European Union, for example, it's 70 years after the death of the creator. So I believe Jerry and Joe both died in the 1980s.
But that becomes murkier because the creator sold the creation and all rights therein to national. So,
well, it's that murkiness that the Schusters are counting on being able to use for their lawsuit, and I think rightly so. The fact that there is no logical outcome to it other than DC owns this, it's theirs, is really just a way for them to kind of, okay, this will be bad press unless you settle.
You're right.
Which is what happens time and time again. But yes, in the United States and several other countries and territories, Superman is what, 4 years? 3 years. 4 years away.
Last year was Steamboat Willie, which was 28. This year was
it's more than 4. It's not 90 years, but it's shortly thereafter because the 90th is the 90th anniversary of the character is coming up in the next 3 years.
Yes,
which one hopes they will have a James Gunn Superman sequel ready for 2028.
I mean, if they don't understand. I mean, one of the big pushes, and I will throw these guys out there a bunch. One of the big pushes for Tim Burton's Batman in 1989 was the fact that they were releasing the movie on the 50th anniversary of the first appearance of Batman.
Yep, absolutely.
So they had that ready to go. That was in big play in the press. Mm-hmm. So like there better be like a Star Trek movie next year because it'll be the 60th.
Well, if there's a Star Trek movie coming out in 2026, they've been sitting on it. It's a secret because holy shit, we would know.
Or they need to start like in 2 months.
Yeah. Okay. So we've talked about who the fuck we are. We're those guys. We're the Brothers Blanchard.
Yes.
We've talked about why we're here. We talk about franchise movies. We do it because we like franchises. We like movies. This year, we want to talk about Superman because Superman is going to be at the forefront this year because of the launch of the new DC universe in the form of Superman, the movie, being put out in July. We talked about the news related to that, but let's talk about where the concept of superhero films as we know them today truly begins. Back in 1975, Alexander and Ilya Salkind, father and son, start looking to acquire a property from DC Comics slash National Periodicals, as it was still at that point known. They wanted the rights to develop, produce, and distribute a Superman movie. This is a point before Warner Brothers gobbles up DC Comics. That happens shortly after the success of Superman the movie. 1979, 1980 is when those deals finally start inking. By the time Superman 2 comes out, DC is already owned by Warner. But at this point, Warner's is not in the mix, except they have a distribution deal. They don't own the rights for production. They have we will distribute any Superman movie that is made, and the Salkinds are perfectly happy to make a movie and hand it off to somebody else to handle the marketing budget thereof.
Particularly a large studio like Warner Brothers.
Exactly. So the Salkinds, who are famous-ish for using sort of easy to access properties to do quick turnarounds and release films. Notoriously, the Three Musketeers earlier in the 70s. The three, and then the Four Musketeers, which is a topic that we will address here as it relates to Superman in a few minutes. So the Salkinds, they buy the rights and they start working on finding the right mix for Superman. The first thing they start doing is looking for a writer and a director. The director they immediately think of is Richard Lester. Who is Richard Lester? It's a great question. Richard Lester, director of Superman 2. Who is he before that? Well, he's a frequent collaborator with the Salkinds. He was the director of the Three Musketeers and the Four Musketeers, and he was largely a journeyman filmmaker who worked cheap and did small budget films. He was the one who lit on the idea of budgeting the Three and the Four Musketeers together and shooting them as a package to then release as two separate films. Something the Salkinds immediately embraced and started with some of their other productions, and they worked that into the production of Superman. And Richard Lester is the name that they want to direct a Superman movie. But Warner Brothers wants a name directing a Superman movie. Warner Brothers is going to have to distribute this thing. And by 1976, when we're getting to the point of actually building out the production, Warner's is like, hey, we live in an era of directors. Like, directors are a thing now.
It's the 70s. That's true. Like, the world changed in the way films were perceived. Like, I'm sure there are podcasts just about this. Go out there, find it, listen, come back, tell me what 100%. You found. Maybe I'll do one.
Right, exactly. Even the directors that we know as names from later works, some of them are already names by 1976. Like, Star Wars hasn't come out, but George Lucas is American Graffiti George Lucas.
Yes.
He's also one of the names that gets discussed for directing Superman, but he's busy. The first name that comes up to everybody's lips is the man who just invented the fucking blockbuster. Accidentally. um, I think it would have been an interesting concept. Folks who don't know, the term blockbuster comes around years and years and years prior to this. But what we
Yes.
know as the modern filmic blockbuster, created by exactly one man.
Daryl F. Zanuck? No, Steven F. Spielberg.
Steven Spielberg, 100%. Jaws came out in 1975 and changed the fucking landscape of film forever. Period.
Yes.
We live in a post-Jaws world. We will never understand what films were like before 1975. It's a whole different world. Like when people who grew up prior to the release of Jaws talk about going to the movies and the way movies were made, the way they were distributed, they're speaking a completely different fucking language. Because Jaws rewrote the book. And everybody wants Steven Spielberg to rewrite their book.
Yes.
Salkinds can't afford Steven Spielberg. They don't have Spielberg money.
I mean, also, like, he's got this whole other alien thing that he's doing. He's like, I'm going to tell this Close Encounters story, which is, well, if you've not seen, I know we're talking about Superman, but if you haven't seen Close Encounters of the Third Kind, man, go out and see Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And then come back to me and tell me how long he stays on the frame of Richard Dreyfuss on the ladder outside of his house.
Is You Should Watch Close Encounters of the Third Kind going to become the You Should Watch the Prowler of this franchise?
No,
seriously, kids, go watch Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
The Prowler,
right?
Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Like, it doesn't roll off the tongue as much, but you should go out and watch Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
You absolutely should, because in many ways, Close Encounters of the Third Kind is, and maybe we'll talk about this on a future Steven Spielberg related podcast, is arguably his most personal film until The Fabelmans.
I can see that.
But that's for a Spielberg podcast, which I think could happen. You could twist our arms. We could talk about Spielberg movies for a couple hours. I don't have a problem with that.
But so Lucas is off doing his Maverick. I want to make my own movie. This is totally a B sci-fi movie, which I'm going to sell kids toys from.
Yep.
No, really, guys, that's Star Wars. I don't care how much you love it. Like, it's a B movie.
Yes.
That was made for like $12 million.
Yeah.
I think. Like, it was a low number. And what they did with it is amazing. But they don't have Lucas. They don't have Spielberg. You can't touch Francis Ford Coppola because like he's dying over there wherever he's shooting Apocalypse Now.
Right. Well, and Coppola, there's an interesting overlap with Coppola because they did discuss Coppola, and there was a pitch out to Coppola to get him to direct Superman. Coppola makes no move based on that pitch, right? But that pitch lands somebody else. Mario Puzo, writer of The Godfather, writer of the screenplay of The Godfather, both the book and the screenplay, is aware of the pitch, and the pitch is to the both of them. And Puzo bites. Puzo's like, I'll write Superman the movie. The Superman the movie that we know, as written by Mario Puzo, is not necessarily written by Mario Puzo. There's a lot of his influence in the film. We'll talk about sort of the themes that he interjects into Superman that never leave Superman, despite his origins.
Yeah.
Puzo, notorious Catholic, makes Superman Catholic too. Having grown up Catholic and having read a lot of Superman, they no, no, he is
I
not.
mean, it's not enough that he's Moses.
Right.
Like he has to subsume other religious figures as well.
Exactly.
Because he's literally Moses, guys.
Literally. A little bit of the myth of the golem thrown in. There's a lot thrown in there. There's a little bit of Hercules. There's a little bit of Samson. He's a mixed bag, and maybe it's a little late, and we should have done this to begin at the beginning of this. We can get into the Siegel and Schuster of it all, where he comes from a little bit later. So Coppola's a no-go. Spielberg's a no-go. Lucas is a no-go. Where else are we going to look?
I don't even know. Because like another big name from the time that just screams, I can see going out to those other guys of the Mavericks, but you're just not going to go out to De Palma for Superman.
No, not at all. And no one ever does. As far as I'm aware. I mean, maybe they had a conversation with De Palma. But what is a genre of film that is full of directors looking to make their bone? Where do so many film directors get their start? A genre where they can tell stories cheaply that showcase an ability to tell a story with visual flair.
Well, didn't that used to be TV?
Used to be TV, and where we end up, he has a lot of TV credits as well. But what's a film genre that allows that to happen?
Usually, well, to be honest, horror does that.
Correct, horror. And in 1976, one of the most successful horror movies released is The Omen. Directed by Richard Donner. So the Salkinds reach out to Donner, and Donner immediately bites. Like, Donner gets Superman. And he recognizes that this is an opportunity to take something that may feel a little staid to the audience. It may feel a little hackneyed, and make feel real.
I believe that ties into the tagline.
It does.
I believe a man can fly.
Yes, indeed. First thing that happens when Donner gets hired, though, is he gets to go to the DC archive in New York. He gets to go pour through the art archive there, look at old issues, and he finds this image of Superman, and he asks if he can have it replicated. And it's an image of Superman flying, and he takes it, and he has his art department put the word verisimilitude under it, and makes this poster of Superman flying with the word verisimilitude on it, and puts it in the production offices of the Superman movie. Donner gets from the very beginning, that's the key to Superman. That if you can believe it, it will absolutely ensorcel you. You will get trapped in the myth if you can believe it for a second.
Yeah.
The marketing campaign, "You will believe a man can fly," comes from that belief, right? Like that is the Donner masterstroke. And if nothing else, that is his legacy, his stamp on the legacy of Superman. But the movie is nothing but Dick Donner's stamp on the legacy of Superman. Because this movie boils down at that point, 1970, 76, 77, so 2 years early. But 40 years of continuity and stories and details about Superman and boils them down to their bare bones essentials. These are the most important elements to a Superman story: the destruction of the planet Krypton, Jor-El and Laura launching Superman to safety on Earth, being found by the Kents, Jonathan Kent dying to teach Clark a lesson that even with his great powers, can't save everyone. Superman getting trained in the Fortress of Solitude by Jor-El, um, which is indeed a Silver Age concept. And then Superman coming to the city and finding his place in the Daily Planet, Lois Lane and Jimmy Olsen working for Perry White. This is the backbone
Yes.
of a Superman story, right? And Dick Donner goes, those are the things I need, and that's what the story needs to be about. And maybe, and we'll talk about this when we get to sort of our reviews of the movie and our views on it, maybe he focuses on those things a little too much in some regards. Structurally, maybe.
So the Superman the movie is sometimes less Superman the movie and more just the movie.
Yeah, in some regards, yes. Donner's not the hugest fan of the sort of heavy-handed narrative that Puzo has turned in, so he brings in Tom Mankiewicz to look over and produce another draft, and Mankiewicz dials back as much as he can of the Christian undertones, the Catholic undertones that Puzo had put into the script. But in places where it's hard to remove, like the Jor-El stuff, it stays.
Yeah, like I mean, if you're not, you just have to completely rewrite it.
Yes.
But it's you can't get rid of it.
Exactly.
I've tried to figure out a way to get rid of it. I've tried to figure out a way to more accept it. I've tried to figure out a way to just appreciate planet Krypton.
Yes, Krypton. And then that leads us to sort of the next most important part is the conversation about casting.
The highest paid for the longest time of 12 minutes.
Oh, yes. Yes. And frankly, no one is sure whether he actually wanted to be there or not.
I've heard that he hated the costuming because of the way it lit up, like the physical demands of it lighting up.
Yeah.
Interrupted his process.
And the he we're talking about, if you're listening to this, if you've gotten this far into a conversation about Richard Donner's Superman the movie from 1978, to not know that we're talking about Marlon Brando, stop this right now. Go
watch Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
And after you're done watching Close Encounters of the Third Kind, watch Superman the movie.
Yeah, it'll help.
Any version, any one of the 17 million cuts of Superman the movie that you can find on home video or on the streaming platform, watch one. Anyone, doesn't matter to me. If it has, extra footage of classic Superman actresses talking, or Superman getting tested on his way to Lex Luthor, doesn't matter. That's cool. Watch Superman the movie. Otherwise, why are you here? Maybe it's because you love our dulcet tones and you've missed us for these 7 years. So yes, we're talking about Marlon Brando, who gets paid a whopping, oh my God, What was the total?
I cannot remember.
It's several
At one
million.
point,
It was like,
yes, at one point I could tell you.
yeah.
But I am not that teenager anymore.
No. Several million to come in and play the role of Jor-El for literally 12 minutes. It was, I think, 14 shooting days. So they had him for 2 weeks, which sounds like, if you did listen to our former podcast, if you came from the era of us talking about negative pickups and shooting schedules of horror movies, 14 days, that's half a shoot for a Halloween film. For the lengthy, ongoing shoot that was Superman the movie / Superman 2, 2 weeks, a very short window.
Yes.
This movie shoots for close to a year and a half, and then it gets shut down.
Like the biggest corollary, if you are a modern film goer, is the Marvel process.
Yes, very much so. Very much so. In fact, they're very similar, largely because of the connection of Kevin Feige. Kevin Feige was an assistant to Dick Donner. Him and Jeff Johns, the comic artist and writer who spearheaded the DCEU project that led to Man of Steel, Batman v Superman, and 2 versions of the Justice League. After writing for DC Comics for several years, sort of moved into the DC Entertainment. Both of those men got their start working for Richard Donner. Kevin Feige famously makes every director who is directing a Marvel movie watch Superman the movie before they shoot their film. He's like, all right, you're about to shoot, go watch Superman the movie. That's your assignment. Because he feels that it's very informative on the genre, and because they do follow a bit of the process that Donner laid out for how he was going to shoot his 2 movies. And it is 2 movies. Puzo writes 1 movie. When Mankiewicz comes in, he picks up the Salkinds brief that we're going to be shooting Superman and Superman 2 concurrently, so that we have a film for 1978 and we have a film for 1980, which becomes 1981. But the intent was for 80. Or
actually, if you watch,
is 80.
No, if you watch all the way to the end of some of these versions of Superman, the end credits is Superman will return in 1979.
Yes. Well, the plan was to pump them right back into each other. By the time Superman is out and successful, production has already drifted and they're targeting 80. And then there are more problems, which we will discuss when we talk about Superman 2 in our very next episode. But in this film, in this episode that we're talking about, Donner's shooting 2 Superman back to back, and he has 2 very large problems going at the same time. He has an absence of the most important player in his film. He has already cast Marlon Brando. He's paying Marlon Brando a shit ton of money. And Marlon Brando is, frankly, he's the front end of the shoot. They kind of shoot him before they start shooting anything involving Clark, Superman, Kal-El, right? He's front-loaded. He's the big thing. He's open about his disdain for the script. He's open about his disdain for the very concept of playing the character. Famously, he's quoted as saying that the planet Krypton can be anything I want it to be. Like, who are you to say I'm not a bagel? A bagel can say these lines. Like, he was very upset with the visual process, and that is, I think, where the bagel quote comes from. Because what you may or may not be aware of, audience, is that the glowing white robes that the Kryptonian elders wear when they're judging uh, Zod, Ursa, and Nan for their crimes against humanity. Uh, that is a reflective tape material that has been, and it was tape at first. It was not sure exactly the type of tape, but it was a reflective camera tape, similar to the one that is used to create the original attempted lightsaber effect in George Lucas's Star Wars, prior to the rotoscoped lightsaber that we see throughout the rest of the film. Spoilers for Star Wars. Not really spoilers. Um, One thing to look for in Star Wars, if you have an older version of it or can find the footage online, the lightsaber effect when Luke is on the Millennium Falcon playing with the remote is different than the lightsaber effect at any other point in the film. Because this is a spinning reflective tape that is reflecting back light that is being aimed at it from off camera. The exact same effect is what is used to light up the Kryptonian clothing on Krypton and various other things. Anything that glows on Krypton is this reflective tape. Brando hated it. He also hated having to wear the Superman symbol. Having spent most of his 2 weeks working with Terrence Stamp and oh my God, I've just lost their names. And the actor and actress Sarah Douglas, who plays Ursa, and Jack. God, I really have lost his name. Jack Larson. Oh, no, Jack Larson is Jimmy Olsen.
Old Jimmy Olsen.
Old Jimmy
from the
Olsen
TV show.
from Superman, The Adventures of Superman. I've lost his name. But the actor who played Nan. They are sort of a early casting. Like that part of the film coalesces quickly, as does Gene Hackman, as does that portion of the cast. The last pieces to fall into place are Superman and Lois Lane.
Jack O'Halloran.
O'Halloran, thank you. Yes, Jack Larson is Jimmy Olsen, completely different guy, who does not appear in this film, but does appear later in the franchise, and we'll talk about him in multiple contexts. We will talk about him as Jimmy Olsen and as an unnamed bartender who I believe was intended to be Bibbo Babowski in Superman Return. So a wide net gets cast looking for Superman, right? And they look at everybody, and I mean everybody. Robert Redford, Sly Stallone is talked about. If it's possible to have talked about you as an actor playing the role of Superman, you were talked about as playing the role of Superman. Same thing happens with Lois Lane. That net gets cast very wide. And ultimately, it lands on the perfect person. Juilliard trained Christopher Reeve. He's given the role of Superman. Now, I mean, we can go down the list of everybody who was, cast, but let's jump to the chase. Christopher Reeve, who spends a lot of time bulking up to look like Superman and gets into the physicality of Superman, but also uses the method that he uses as an actor to try to get inside the skin of who Superman is in a way that I don't know other actors tried to. I think I don't think there is a better casting in any movie.
Like in the history of movies?
Like in the history of movies. I think, honestly, Christopher Reeve as Superman, right up there, top of the list. And that movie doesn't exist if he's not cast as Superman. It doesn't hit the way it hits if he's not cast as Superman. It doesn't live as long as it does if he isn't cast as Superman. I mean, you can argue that about a lot of different things, but I mean, there is something about him in the role that was just, it was lightning in a bottle.
Okay. Now I got to think of the history of movies to find another perfect casting.
Well, you know, I did throw that one out. I should have warned you I was going to say that piece, but you know.
Like Charlie Chaplin is a little tramp, but that's not so much casting as a character developed.
Right. I mean, he created the little tramp for himself. So I don't know that counts. But this is let me give you a little bit of my reason, right? Like, so this is a man who looks like a drawing that was created in 1938.
Yes.
Who studies the best way to portray aspects of a character that are only written down in a single sentence about who he is. Mild mannered reporter. In the 1940s, he becomes the perfect embodiment of this character. So much so that almost 50 years later, we're still comparing every Superman, and I mean every Superman, to him. And I don't see that ending anytime soon.
Probably not. Not until everybody who knows that he was Superman is dead. But, you know, there's the internet now, so
right.
It'll go on forever as long as there's electricity.
Like, I'll give you a parallel example. Over in the Star Trek franchise, where William Shatner was the progenitor of the role of James Tiberius Kirk, Captain of the Enterprise. We've had two actors who play Kirk, and neither one of them are compared to the originator of the role as much as actors who play Superman are compared to Christopher Reeve.
Fair.
Chris Pine does not nearly get as much shit for his performance as Kirk as Henry Cavill does for his performance as Superman. Or
well, you know,
Tyler Hoechlin, or, you know, who have you.
Well, yeah. But, you know, that's because people like Chris Pine.
Ooh, throwing the Henry Cavill shade early.
I mean, he looks like Superman. I mean, he looks like Superman.
I know, but plant the flag early, sure. Why the fuck not?
And, you know, maybe if he'd have gotten to play Superman, I wouldn't say such things.
There you go. There you go. Okay. That's fair. No, I mean, that's, yes. We'll talk more about the Henry Cavill of it all when we get to Man of Steel. But yeah, he's controversial in my opinion. Christopher Reeve is not controversial. He's not even really questionable, right? You remember the outcry, the Mr. Mom's gonna play Batman of it all. When Michael Keaton is announced as playing Batman, people look at his previous roles and go, "Wait, what?" But when Christopher Reeve is announced as Superman, and you see a picture of him, not even in the suit, everyone's just like, "Oh yeah, okay." Kind of like I was talking about earlier with Rachel Brosnahan.
Yeah.
You see a picture of Christopher Reeve, and they said this guy's going to play Superman. You just go, "I see it, dude, Superman." As wide a net as is cast to find him, similarly wide net is cast to find Lois Lane. Some standouts: Leslie Ann Warren, who had played Lois Lane in the televised musical of Superman the movie, is one of the front runners. Stockard Channing.
Not seeing that one at all.
If you look at her screen test is available on one of the various releases of Superman the movie on home video. Superman the movie, much like Halloween, has been released almost repeatedly on home video since the first time it came to home video. And there are multiple cuts, multiple different versions, all with their own host of special features. But there is on one of the many versions I own, you can see sort of the a reel of a handful of actresses, and Stockard Channing's in there. And it's not a bad performance. Like, I think it would have changed Stockard Channing's career in a big way had she been Lois Lane. Like she's very, like, I can see it when I watch it, and I can see it at the end. There are various points in her career where I look back and I go, yeah, she could. Abby Bartlett could have played Lois Lane. I can see those two connecting. It's not necessarily the Stockard Channing in between those two periods.
Fair.
But she's one of the front runners. But then they get to Lois Lane. I mean, once you have her, you've got her. And this is one of those things where it's just a perfect casting. So they do a chemistry read between Margot Kidder and Christopher Reeve, and once those two get together, it's clear as day. That is Superman, that is Lois Lane. We move forward into a grueling 16-month shoot. 16, 17. Where they're making Superman and Superman 2.
That's why it's so long, folks. It's not one blockbuster, but two.
It's two.
Special effects heavy, which they have to set up in production to be filled in later in post. And a lot of stuff actually shot in camera. Film was different back then.
Yes. And even the thing that you just said, done in post, composited in post. A lot of the stuff, a lot of the effects heavy stuff, let's fly them through the air. Let's, put Chris on wires. Let's put Chris and Margot on wires. Was shot at the front of the schedule. And, dialogue heavy scenes were shot at the back of the schedule. The narrative happens after the effects. Because Donner has pushed this verisimilitude. You will believe a man can fly. We need to push the effects envelope. And they do that a number of ways. There are remote control Supermen that fly through the air. There are catapulted Supermen that fly through the air. There are Superman kites that fly through. Every possible way of making a man fly is explored. And the green screen process that eventually becomes Superman's flight is built. And the gimbal that he is flown on is similar to the one that is used to fly the Millennium Falcon over on the production of Star Wars. In fact, Superman is not the sole reason, but Superman is one of the reasons for the adoption of chroma key green over blue screen blue. Because chroma key and blue screen is a process where you remove a color and replace it with a new background. Well, Superman's costume is blue.
And if you've watched or listened to anything about Star Wars, you do not hear the words green screen at all. It is blue once. Screen until you get to the prequels.
And most productions use blue screen at this point in time. chroma key green already existed. It's already been used, but it's not the standard. It's not the thing that everyone uses. Donner adopts it because I have to have some way to differentiate the blue of the background from the blue of Superman's costume. So we use a green screen. And green screen, it turns out, is actually more effective than a blue screen because chroma key green, that particular puke neon shade of green, doesn't exist in nature. Right? It doesn't exist in most fabrics because nobody's choosing to wear that color. It's not it's not an attractive green by any stretch of the imagination.
No, it's not.
Whereas the blue of blue screen is kind of a royal blue. I mean, it's a visible blue that appears in a lot of fabrics and in clothing. So Donner just takes his crew and he focuses on the effects, and he makes the promise: you will believe a man can fly. And then he starts shooting the rest of the movie. And I've heard that Alexander Salkind has made the joke on a couple of behind the scenes things, interviews after the fact. He gets to a point where he's like, "You will believe that Dick Donner can finish this movie." The Salkinds are impatient at best to get a finished film, and what they're seeing are these amazing beginnings of special effects because they're not composited, but there's no story. They haven't shot stuff yet, so they have their sort of first big blow up between the Salkinds and Dick Donner, where Salkinds show up and they're like, "Shoot some scenes." Come on, shoot us some stuff. So he starts shooting some of the Lois and Clark stuff, and then some of the Lex stuff. But he's still kind of dragging his feet. He's still kind of taking his time. Well, the Salkinds have made a promise to Warner Brothers of a release date. And that release date is coming down the pike very, very, very quickly. Which is when we have the second big confrontation with the Salkinds. There are many little ones. Donner and the Salkinds are oil and water. They do not get along. But there's a point where they push back and they're like, all right, you have to finish this movie because it's got to be in theaters in 2 months. You have to finish Superman the movie. I don't give a fuck about Superman 2. If you don't make Superman the movie, there is no Superman 2. And that is when they start to structure an ending to Superman the movie, to try to wrap it out. They already have the ending of Superman 2 in the can because it's uncomposited special effects. And it's one of the special effects that has been composited by the time they actually start pushing for an ending. So the ending of Superman the movie, where Superman flies around the planet to visualize going back in time, is actually robbed from Superman 2. The ending of Superman 1, I theorized, and I looked into the script to make sure, was really just Superman is really great, and he puts back the San Andreas Fault, puts it back together with his immense strength, and he saves the day. That's the ending, folks. It was a real simple ending to the Superman movie. But the ending featured what is now the beginning of the Superman 2 Richard Donner cut, if you can track it down out there. The nuclear weapon that Superman throws into space from Hackensack, New Jersey, saving Eve Tessmacher's mom first, rather than Jimmy or Lois. It explodes in space, cracking the Phantom Zone crystal that contains Zod, Ursa, and Non, setting up Superman 2. Makes sense. Simple narrative. So they take the original ending and they have to do something to justify the stakes of him needing to go back in time. So they kill Lois Lane. So Superman has to go back in time to save her. And then we wrap out with a nice, hey, Superman likes everybody. Oh, he takes Lex Luthor and Otis to jail. Cool. Superman the movie is over. So before we start talking about any favorite scenes or things we love about Superman the movie, what are your thoughts on this wildly haggard process of making this film?
It's the sort of thing that can only happen in the 70s.
Yeah.
Like that is the in-between time of the collapse of the studio system and the burgeoning influence of ownership from the video market.
Yes.
Like
yeah.
this
100%.
this is the Wild West again, in such a way that this process could never be replicated in this manner again. Star Wars could not be replicated in the manner it was made. Nobody is going to let somebody build a shark that doesn't work and film on an island for 8 months again.
Right.
This just doesn't happen. Like, it didn't happen before. It doesn't happen after. All this stuff is a confluence, like between 1972 and 1979. This is a story of the 70s, and this is a story of the haggard process of Superman, of getting this struggle to be seen. Like, you can't believe a man will fly unless, it's in theater and everybody's sitting there watching it. I understand what you're trying to do, Dick Donner, but we need to have a movie.
Right. Exactly. So, I mean, the Salkinds are not wrong.
They're not wrong, but I don't know if they're exactly in the right in the way that they push.
Mm-hmm. Sure. I would argue that they're both in the right and both in the wrong. Because what I didn't say was, yes, they get Superman the movie released. They come up with an ending for Superman the movie, and then they stop production on Superman 2, fire Dick Donner, hire Richard Lester, reshoot half the movie, because Gene Hackman is loyal to Richard Donner and fucking refuses to come back to set to shoot Superman 2. Meanwhile, Margot Kidder wishes she had been loyal to Dick Donner and said no and didn't come back, but she does come back and has a terrible time with Richard Lester, causing her to not be in Superman 3. The dominoes start falling the second Richard Donner is fired. But in some ways, this is a theme. I bring this up because it will become a theme. In some ways, firing the director and bringing someone else in leads to a better product than what Richard Donner intended for Superman 2. This will happen again in the Superman movie ethos, where firing the director and hiring another jackass will lead to a better film in some aspect.
Well, better than what was intended, but he can't do what he's intended because he already took that ending. So we actually don't know what the true Donner Superman 2 would have been, because he doesn't have that ending anymore.
Yeah. And he's not given the chance to figure out that logic puzzle of how do I end Superman 2 now.
Yeah.
Lester gets to figure that out. And that is almost immaterial to the discussion of Superman the movie, though, because when people go to see Superman the movie in 1978, they're not thinking about Superman 2. They're thinking about the promise they were given in December of 77 when they saw the trailer for Superman the movie. When they saw the first posters for Superman the movie. And they got the marketing campaign, the promise. You will believe a man can fly. And you do. That's the thing. It does. It succeeds. It wins over audiences and becomes a relatively massive success. Bigger proportionally and adjusted for inflation. Bigger than any other Superman movie. This one blows up. Man of Steel does not come close to this. I don't have exact numbers, but I have done the adjusted for inflation comparison between Man of Steel and this before.
Back when it used to be so much easier, before things like that were put behind a paywall.
Yes. For those of you who are here with us because we're us, then you like what we do. We are talking about Box Office Corner, which is harder to do without Box Office Mojo. No way advertised. Just called out.
Like you used to just be able to do clickety-clack and oh, look, I want to see what this 1978 movie made in today's dollars.
You can still do it with adjusted for inflation. There are inflation adjusters you can enter the numbers into, but it doesn't give you the per ticket price. Like Box Office Mojo was really good for this, folks.
And I hear it still is.
If you
pay for the IMDb Pro.
See, and if we knew anything about the podcast network we work for, this is where we throw to a commercial. But I don't know that if there are any ads. I haven't talked to our dear leader in some time. I don't know. I'll have to check with. No, I don't believe we have any ads to pimp. But don't forget to subscribe to the Patreon for the ARK of E. We'll get more elegant about pitching stuff like that. Okay.
You will believe two brothers will pitch Patreon.
Yeah. You will believe two brothers can figure out how to do a podcast again. It's not like riding a bike, folks. It's trying to shake off the rust a little bit here. So Superman the movie comes out, massive success. People love it. People are clamoring for a Superman 2. Eventually it will come. But that's not going to be today's topic. Okay. So, Superman comes out in 1978, introduces us to the standard things, the things we know about Superman in 1978. Superman, Lois, Jimmy, working at the Daily Planet, Perry White's the boss. Is that the comics of 1978?
No, because somewhere in the 70s they were like, hey, newspaper, that's something that comes out of like the 30s. That's crazy. That's like radio, man. Nobody works for the newspaper. Everybody's on a news show on TV.
Mm-hmm. And more than that, DC editorial's like, okay, we've canceled Superman's girlfriend, Lois Lane, because nobody reads it. So why is Lois Lane still in the comic books? By 1978, Lois Lane is gone, effectively. She's referenced every now and again, but Lois is no longer in the book. The sort of girl who gets in danger role is taken over by other WGBS broadcaster, Cat Grant. Lois is just gone. In fact, DC Comics gets an early preview of Superman the movie and goes, oh, shit, we need to bring Lois back. Millions of
Capitalize.
kids are going to see this movie and go, "Oh, I want to buy a Superman comic. Holy shit, we got to put him back at the Daily Planet. We got to do all this old shit that we haven't done in years."
All the stuff we did to modernize him, we got to unmodernize him because this movie modernizes him.
In a completely different way. Modernizes him in such a way that it inspires a comic writer and artist in how he will modernize Superman again in 1986. For those unfamiliar with the comic side of things, in 1986, after the Crisis on Infinite Earths, which is the third rail of conversations about comics and comic adaptations, I'm not talking about it. It's too important. There's a thing called Crisis on Infinite Earths. Look it up. But at the end of that, everything relaunches over at DC Comics, and Marvel artist and writer John Byrne is hired to come in and reboot Superman, to make Superman more accessible to a modern audience. And the first thing he does is make sure that it aligns as closely as possible with Superman the movie. And that's really a smart play. He does make some changes from what's presented in Superman the movie, but he tries to keep Superman's powers at the sort of base level that we know from Superman the movie. He tries to make it about the interplay between Lois and Clark and Superman, just like in the movie. It's a template that he uses when rebooting Superman in the Man of Steel miniseries. But the comics of the 1970s is far away from that. Superman at this point literally lost his gained a sort of immunity to kryptonite. I was trying to look for some other way to say that, like lost his unimperfect. There's a word, but kryptonite doesn't affect him like it does.
Is this also like had they taken him down a notch and he's not able to juggle planets anymore?
Well, that was because of the thing that made kryptonite not affect him. Like the two things coincide. Yes, this is when he is depowered a little bit. Which depowering Superman in at any point in the Silver Age is a useful thing, because he gets pretty OP in the Silver Age, juggling planets, sneezing away whole galaxies. Like, dude needs a depower. So that's the comic side of things. If you could pick a couple of standout scenes, Superman the movie, could be the best scene, could be your favorite scene, could be a good scene and a bad scene, could be a thing you don't like about Superman the movie. Two standout scenes. What would you pick?
Well, to start with, I'm not going to do that. What I'm going to do is if you had listened to our previous podcast, I'm going to tie Superman the movie directly to Friday the 13th.
Oh, well, I cannot wait to hear this. Go right ahead.
And it's in one of the scenes that is played for comedy.
Okay.
When Superman brings the boat, you see the boat outside the police precinct, and the one cop is talking to the desk sergeant.
Yep.
The desk sergeant is played by Enos, You're an American Original truck driver, Rex Everhart.
Yes, indeed. Good catch. Good one. Nice.
Like when I was doing the rewatch for this, I was like, I know that guy. I know that guy. And then I like, yes, because the line, you're an American Original. I'm sorry. Like, He's an American original. He was in Superman.
Yes, yes, it was.
Scenes that stand out for me. One of them is like I've had a it is both brilliant and problematic for me since I was a small child. Because yes, I will believe a man can fly, but I don't think I do believe a man can fly for that long. The whole
Well, see,
scene of him
yeah,
flying with Lois goes on and
it
on
does. It does.
and on and on.
I will completely agree that that is one of the cringier edits in the film. It's not. We're going to talk at the end of this about the way we would make the movie different. That's a way I'd make the movie different for sure.
The thing that has always stood out for me, and it's if this was the in the original part of the ending as well, so be it. It's when he takes off to fly to go back in time, or we don't even know what he's going to do because he just takes off flight from dead Lois. And then there's the cloud scene, and it's the two voices. It's Glenn Ford, Jonathan Kent, and Marlon Brando. And this is why I will always defend Clark Kent, and I will never defend Superman.
100%. I see where you're going, and I agree with everything you're about to say.
It's Jor-El is telling him that he cannot interfere with their history.
It is forbidden. Forbidden.
Forbidden. And Glenn Ford, Jonathan Kent, I know you were put here for a reason.
Yep.
And that is Superman. He was put here for a reason.
Yep.
And he chooses in that moment Clark Kent. He chooses Jonathan over Krypton, over Jor-El. He is all the foibles. And this is something that people don't focus on so much with Superman. And when they get bogged down, well, you can't tell a Superman story because he's the greatest, he can do anything. No, the story is what he can't do. He's human. He's Kryptonian, but he was raised human. He's one of us. Like Batman's not one of us. Batman's a terrified, freaky 10-year-old in a suit who goes around and beats people up. Don't get me wrong. I love Batman.
The old Batman is the reality, Bruce Wayne is the costume, Clark Kent is the reality, Superman is the costume.
Yes.
Argument.
Yeah, and I just love that. I love that he chooses. He goes back in time. He follows his heart as opposed to the dictates of what he is supposed to do. He's Superman, but he's every man.
Yeah.
In more ways. Well, you can't be Superman, but you could grow up to be Batman. No, you can't grow up to be Batman unless you're a fucking billionaire.
Right.
But anybody
unless
can
you
be
have
Superman.
the money to get all that training.
Yeah.
Anybody can be Superman if they have the power, if they have the ability to make a choice. Superman is fundamentally a man of action.
Yes.
A man who makes choices, a man who acts, a man who speaks, a man who advocates. He is active in his own life and everyone else's, and that's important. An important aspect of Superman, and I will bring this up again. Superman is a man of action. Okay, that's a very good scene. That's definitely on my list of standout scenes as well. Particularly because of the choice of Jonathan over Jor-El, of Clark over Superman, choosing his identity as who he was, of how he was raised.
Yes.
And that's very important for Superman. I think if I had to pick one standout scene, it would be the other side of the scene you called out as being a negative. Because you learn everything you need to know about Clark Kent as a human being by the scene in which Superman gets interviewed by Lois, takes her away to fly for far too fucking long, and then Clark Kent comes in after the flight scene. The bookends of that flight, both the act that Clark is putting on as Superman for his interview with Lois, you know, Clark, that's your boyfriend? You know, all of that flirtatious feeling her out and then coming back and then being Clark and for that brief moment where he takes off his glasses and rises to his full height. And you see the transformation.
But doesn't.
Yeah. Yeah. That moment is so Superman. Because much like what you just said, you know, you can't tell a good Superman story. Well, Superman story isn't about what he can do, it's about what he can't do. That is what Superman can't do. He's faced with the fact that, okay, I have all this power and I could be anyone I want to be, but I'm still Clark Kent. And I have to shrink away from being Superman. I don't know if I can put this person at risk. I don't know if I can force her to make that choice.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna not. I'm just gonna step back and be Clark. Retreating from the world so that he can be a part of it is a fascinating look at the character. But what really makes that stand out to me is the physicality of Christopher Reeve. The way you see him transform from Clark Kent into Superman without ripping open his shirt and showing you an S.
Yeah.
Right? It's just taking off the glasses and squaring his shoulders back. And I swear, he gets 6 inches taller.
Okay, not 6 inches, because I watched it.
It fucking looks like it. It feels like it. The emotional reality of that scene is he gets bigger. And then he shrinks back to Clark. That whole sequence, with the exception of the poorly edited flight and the poem, is one of, I think it's quintessential narrative about who Clark Kent and Superman are. And it's the reason your scene exists. I mean, your scene exists because they had to try to figure out how to make time travel work.
Yeah.
And frankly, necessity being the mother of invention creates one of the most important statements about Superman, right? And I don't know if that sequence was in the Superman 2 ending. Time travel is supposed to be the ending of that movie. Yeah. Probably not. But the way it creates that narrative about who is he? Is he Clark or is he Kal-El? That's invented kind of on the fly, and I think it's a different response than if Puzo had written it. I think that's Tom Mankiewicz right there, not Mario Puzo. And the impetus for it is the vulnerability he expresses and feels in that scene as Clark Kent, in the scene I picked. But then there is the quintessential standout Superman scene, and that's the helicopter rescue. It's the perfect introduction for Superman.
Who's got you?
Exactly. Don't worry, miss, I've got you. Who are you? A friend.
Yes.
That is Superman. That sentence right there. Who are you? Answer, a friend. Earnest, forthright, gone. That's Superman. All right. So I don't know. I didn't come up with a scale. No rating, review scale. I didn't come up with any of that. So, how would you rate Superman the movie against all the other live action Superman media that you've engaged with in your life? Right? Like we probably should have talked about some sort of a rating scale, but
I mean, I love me some Smallville.
yeah.
And then
Yes.
and then I also was like, there's a bunch of Smallville that I'm like, okay,
I can do
the show
that.
should have ended. The show should have ended. The show should have ended. Oh, look, that's a cool Doomsday. The show should have ended.
Yeah. I agree.
This, while Super Friends was the first Superman, I've watched this movie a lot.
For sure.
And I've watched this movie a lot before the age of 10.
Yeah.
I watched this movie a lot before I was 6. This, I know the world is different now. And I'm getting ready to throw some old school flex out there. Like, we had HBO in 1978.
I don't think it's as big a flex as you think it is, man.
I don't know. There are people I know who didn't even have cable in 1978.
That's true.
Like, like the whole thing from Mallrats. Why did we date as long as we did? You had cable.
Yeah.
Like, Superman was all over HBO because HBO's even back then wasn't a subsidiary of Warner Brothers. I can't remember when that merger happened.
Not at the time. That happened much later. But
Okay.
Yeah.
But like, it was one of those movies that HBO got. Because I remember seeing the whole movie without commercials well before we had a VCR.
Yeah.
I remember watching it with commercials every time it was on TBS. I remember being a child awake on Saturday mornings by myself. Be like changing channels because I had to get up and physically turn the knob.
Right.
Because we had a cable box without a remote. And I would be turning the knob, and the channels would be clicking, and suddenly there'd be Superman, and I'd watch Superman. Sometimes it was literally the last 3 minutes of Superman.
Yeah.
This, I want to say it's a 10 out of 10. It's a 2 thumbs up. It's the best Superman movie.
There you go. The best Superman movie. For sure.
It's the best iteration of a feature film.
Yeah.
Because Tyler Hoechlin's on a TV show.
I'm in that same dilemma in that if I'm trying to rate it Superman against Superman, it's hard to pit someone against Christopher Reeve. But Tyler Hoechlin became my Superman, right? In a big bad way, and I will talk about that when we talk about Superman and Lois, because you cannot get out of this year of Superman if that's what we're doing here, folks. On Late Fees Waived, you cannot get out of here without having to listen to me talk about Superman and Lois, the single greatest live-action Superman story ever produced. Period. But we're talking about Superman, the movie. And again, I echo your sentiment perfectly. I want to say it's perfect. I want to say it's a 10 out of 10. I want to say it's the best. But I did bring up a point earlier, and that is that I think it focuses too much on establishing fundamentals.
Yeah.
It's a great movie that puts in place all the important elements of Superman's life. It's not really a cohesive film. It does not follow a 3-act structure. Krypton is fucking 30 minutes of this movie at the beginning. Smallville is like 25 minutes of this movie up until the point where he goes to Metropolis. Metropolis on its own is not a 3-act structure. It's not a beginning, a middle, and an end.
No.
It's all set up for a movie that I don't think ever got shot. So I wanna not deduct points for that, but I feel I have to. Because that's the realization I came to as I was rewatching it last night. I'm like, this never develops. Nothing actually happens until, oh shit, there's 30 minutes left.
Yeah.
Now Lex has to begin the plot. It's not. It meanders until then. But because of the way it was shot, I don't know how much of that is. We just don't have the footage.
Yeah.
We don't have a story here that works. Like, the things we have are more minutes of this or another thing here.
I got all this flight. We got all this flight footage, so let's put it all in the movie.
Yeah. But like, if you've seen the ABC cut, as many people call it, which is the 32-minute longer version of Superman that many of us saw on television growing up, and was finally released on DVD for the first time, and for a while became the default release, physical release version of Superman. So much so that when the 4K version came out, that's what I have. In fact, I rewatched the movie on Max over the last couple of days, because this is Superman the movie, and this is a little secret about Superman the movie. I don't know if you people know. I can't get off of Krypton. Like, I watch this movie, I fall asleep during the Krypton footage, and I have to start over.
I may get off of Krypton, but I very rarely make it out of the Fortress of Solitude.
Right. So I've also been showing it to my 3-year-old daughter, who loves Superman. She asks to see Superman fly all the time. She loves the John Williams Superman theme, which 90% of the heavy lifting of this movie is John Williams. He's the unsung hero of this film that we didn't call out in the production. John Williams writing the score for Superman immediately elevates it. And as said, one of the things that Dick Donner always said about the Superman theme was that he heard it for the first time and he said, "Oh, it says Superman in the song. Superman." And he loved that. So I've been showing her Superman in fits and spurts. She had no patience for Jor-El. 3-year-old today does not sit through the entirety of Superman the movie, unlike 3-year-old me, who watched the whole thing every time it was on. Difference in attention spans, I understand, and
I blame the YouTubes.
but my kid hasn't really watched YouTube. But still,
I blame
the point,
Bluey and the
Blue, and the
14-minute
8-minute
structure.
cartoon. Sure, fair. But so we watched a little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit here, a little bit there, and I had to come back to it and watch it in its entirety,
Yeah.
which was something I have not done, and forced myself to stay awake through at home in a while. I saw it in a theater in 2017, 2018. A local club did a special event to raise money for Tidewater Comic Con, and they had the 4K Blu-ray release. And that was the ABC cut with the extra footage. So I rewatching it in these little segments kind of really got me thinking about how it is kind of segments. that aren't really connected. So I'm going to deduct some points. I'm going to say if it's a scale of 1 to 10, I'm going to call Superman the movie an 8. I'm going to tell you, though, there's not a Superman movie that gets more than an 8.
I agree.
I am deducting some points because of some negatives, but there's not a Superman movie that's better than this yet. There are Superman movies that are better movies than this. There are Superman movies that tell a better front to back story, right? Structurally.
There are Superman movies that deserve a better movie for their Superman story,
Yes.
like Superman 3.
Like Superman, exactly, like Superman 3. But there is not a movie, there's not a Superman movie that makes me feel what Superman the movie does.
No.
Like Richard Donner does an amazing job of putting you in that space and making you feel like you're there with Superman.
Also, and some of this is matched on Superman 2
Sure.
because it has to be because it was already shot.
Yeah.
A lot of it has to do with I watched it and I thought I was going to go blind recently when I did the rewatch because of
so
how
bright.
colorful it is and bright it
Yeah.
is. I'm like, I don't remember noticing it being that way because I guess it is me who has gotten dull as I have gotten older. Like the brightness, like that's how the world used to be.
Yeah.
And that's Superman. It's bright. It's bright with a soft haze.
Yes.
Because I noticed the haze.
Yes. The soft focus.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, which also screams 1977 when it was shot.
Absolutely. That's actually one of the things that, going back to the earliest topic of the James Gunn trailer, that's the thing that really sold me on it. Was that first shot of Superman as he fell into the ice, and we see the cloud of vapor go away, and this bright blue and red Superman is sitting there. I was like, fucking finally! I haven't seen Superman in primary colors since Lois and Clark, The
Yeah.
New Adventures of Superman in the 1990s. I mean, I love Brandon Routh's portrayal in Superman Returns. I don't love his costume. It's incredibly subdued.
Yeah.
That's not a bright red S. It's not a bright blue. It's burgundy. It's dark blue. The Henry Cavill suit is so dark. Like there are shots where you can't even see the yellow in the S because it just washes out.
Like
And
for that one, just to hit on it, we'll talk about it later when we do Man of Steel. The blue on it works at times, and it would work brilliantly with Christopher Reeve red.
yeah, oh, absolutely.
It would be an entirely different Superman suit than the Christopher Reeve suit. But the blue doesn't work as well for Superman unless it has, fire engine red.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So it's nice to finally see, at least in what we've seen so far, the footage, it's nice to see that color palette back.
Yeah.
To see the yellow in the S stand out. So the primary colors of Superman the movie are important because Superman is nothing but color. That's who he is.
Yes.
He's the four color superhero.
I mean, if you're going to have four colors, you might as well use them all.
Exactly. So yes, a cautious 8 out of 10 for what is still my favorite Superman movie, though not necessarily my favorite Superman story.
Okay.
Now, here's a challenge, and I think this is the last thing we will do before we let this audience go to start pondering Superman 2, which we will talk about shortly. What would you do differently?
Okay. This is just a huge sticking point for me, and
Yeah.
it has absolutely nothing to do with anything differently other than the credits.
Yeah.
And it's the same problem I have with Batman in '89. Superman and Batman, because of the way movies are made, do not have top billing for the actors in their own movie.
You teased this earlier.
Both of them. Like, Christopher Reeve is not top billed
Nope.
for Superman. It's Gene Hackman, then Marlon Brando, right? Yeah.
I thought it was Brando then Hackman.
They popped up.
It is. Those are the first two.
Yes.
Brando and Hackman. Whether it's Brando first, Hackman second, or Hackman first, Brando second. I'm pretty sure it's Brando first.
And Christopher Reeves third.
Yeah.
Michael Keaton, Batman, second. Jack Nicholson, top.
Yeah.
That's something that bothers me and has bothered me. And I remember at the time, being 14 when Batman came out, that was a thing that people were pissed about. And then some old heads were like, yeah, you want to hear this? Superman's not top billed either.
Nope.
And I'm like, oh, as I hung around in the comic book shop. Because, I used to do that.
Right.
Things that I would change other than that. There's this whole thing that looks like there should be a plot here. And it might have been set up for something in Superman 2.
Right.
There's these whole cops who are investigating Lex Luthor.
Armus.
And gone after their one scene. Or, like, it's not a scene, but it is a scene bouncing back between them following Otis and Lex in his cave mansion. Sewer mansion.
I believe it is a disused subway stop, is what it's meant to be.
So he's right next door to the Turtles. Cool.
Yeah,
got it.
Effectively, yeah. Well, he
but
did it first. The Turtles are right next to him.
But it feels like that there was something there, or there should have been something there.
I will say that there is something there in the alternate cut of this movie. What that is meant to do in the ABC cut, the longer cut of the film, the conversation between the cops establishes that they're looking at Lex Luthor for real estate crimes. Like, that line of dialogue is there, right?
Mm.
So it sets up what's going on in California. But it also sets up the security he has at his underground lair, which in no way gets used in the theatrical cut of the film, which is, you watched on Max as well, right?
Yeah.
What you told me off the podcast.
Yeah,
which is the theatrical cut.
And there's just the push
to the door,
because you actually see him push the cop out, and then there's a quick cut where it's implied that he's pushed under the subway car.
Subway, yeah.
And then the other cop comes with the uniforms and finds his hat and says, "Oh no, Harry," or whatever his name is.
Harry, that is his name.
Okay.
And we never see that cop again. Yes.
Yeah.
But it sets up that he has these advanced security measures.
Yeah.
That he then uses on Superman in the scene where he calls Superman down to meet him, so that he can put the kryptonite thing on him.
Right, with the chain machine guns and the
chain machine
flamethrowers.
guns and the ice that freezes Superman and the flamethrowers. It's. I think that's all it ever did, was set up those two things.
Yeah,
attempt at narrative.
I would change it, and I would make that an actual plot, because I would have cop characters. I would establish the greater Metropolis Police Department.
Yes.
Yeah. I would show that, unlike Batman, Superman is coming into a well-oiled machine
Yes.
because Metropolis is a well-oiled machine.
Yeah.
Uh,
It's New York
it
City in this film.
it just has
Effectively.
the aberration of its criminal super genius in this movie,
Right. Exactly.
who doesn't know that his girlfriend's mother lives in
Hackensack.
Hackensack, or really doesn't like his
Checks my
girlfriend's
watch.
mother,
No, she doesn't.
or doesn't really like his girlfriend's mother.
I'm not sure Miss Tessmacher is his girlfriend. Like, that's never really established.
I don't know. But I feel like it's implied.
It's implied, but like, also it's implied that she's his girl Friday and does shit for him. I don't really know. I don't understand the relationship between Miss Tessmacher and Lex, or Otis and Lex. I don't understand it. It's
Yeah.
never established. Who the fuck is Otis? Why would you have an Otis? I don't. There's not a single Lex Luthor who has ever had an Otis where I was like, that makes sense why this guy has an Otis, until Superman and Lois, where it's like,
See, I think
oh,
I could tell
Cutlet
you
says Luthor totally makes sense why
that
he's got an
that,
Otis.
that one totally makes sense. But I would make a plot out of that. I would throw some structure in the police investigation into into Lex Luthor.
Yeah.
Uh, I I would give I would have more Lex teasing Superman.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely.
Uh,
Testing his metal against Superman, testing Superman against himself. More, yes, 100%.
um, yeah, I think those are the two big changes I would have. Uh, I'd cut down Krypton.
Oh, I would cut the shit out of Krypton.
Um,
Yeah. Okay.
I would uh, definitely cut just one line of dialogue.
Oh, which one?
And it's a small nitpicking thing. So when he's training young Clark in the Fortress of Solitude, he says, "I have been dead for thousands of your years."
Yes.
Yet on the way to Earth in the baby shuttle pod,
Yeah.
which is another thing I would change because I fucking hate that. Like that is the worst uh, baby delivery system out of all the baby Kal-El delivery systems I've ever seen.
Okay.
It looks like a star. I get it. Whatever. It just doesn't work for me. Never has.
Okay.
But on the path to Earth, thousands of years ago, he quotes Einstein. Jor-El quotes Einstein.
Well,
How
I
can he
mean, he
quote?
also reads him, trees. He reads the poem, Trees.
I thought the trees was in the next movie.
Nope.
Hmm.
Brando's not in the next movie.
Hmm.
Brando's not in Superman.
Oh yeah, the bald guy reads. Sorry, it's done again.
It is done again. Yes, it was a gag so much they liked so much they had it done again by Richard Lester. But no, there's footage of it's in the other cut. But yeah, he reads that. Yeah, I agree with that. That's pointless. Um, yeah, it's cut one or the other.
Yeah.
Either cut the Einstein reference or cut the "I will have been dead for many thousands of your years," because mathematically, right, this thing is traveling at superluminal speed. It's going faster than the speed of light. You could argue that there's time dilation happening, right? Like Baby Clark is warping to Earth, and what takes him a month or 6 months is many thousand years. You could argue that, but not with him quoting fucking Einstein. So yeah, 100%. What else is that soup to nuts? Is that what you would do? Just those minor changes?
I might make Kansas not so Dust Bowly desolate.
Yeah, it's meant to be 1948. Based on the interview with Lois and what Lex figures out to figure
Yeah.
out kryptonite and Addis Ababa. It's meant to be 48. We were out of the Dust Bowl in 1948.
Yeah. Like this.
However, I will caution you on one thing though. I will point something out. That's not Kansas. We don't know that.
Okay. Wherever
Smallville is wherever Smallville is. Smallville is not defined as being in Kansas until almost 10 years later.
Okay.
In 86, 87 is when we finally find out where Smallville is. That's a note for everyone at home. In the Golden and the Silver Age, no one ever said where the hell Smallville was. It's just in the Midwest. It was John Byrne who decided or defined in Man of Steel that it was set in Kansas, Smallville, Kansas.
But if that's 48, then the scenes with Clark and Lana and the footballers would be 66.
Yeah.
Which doesn't look like 66 as I imagine 66 looking at all.
No, it looks like the 50s, but they're behind the time because they're in the Midwest in Smallville.
Yeah, whatever.
The only thing, the problem I have with that is, well, no, I guess mathematically. There are so many things that are, little references to other Superman stories and stuff like that. There's the sequence with Lois on the train with her mom, played by Noelle Neal, who was Lois in Superman, in the Adventures of Superman. If that little girl is Lois Lane in 1966, that doesn't quite match with the age of Margot Kidder in 1978.
I've read that is the reason why the dialogue was cut.
Yeah.
Is because they were like, by the way, if based on this, Lois is supposed to be younger than Clark. However, Margot Kidder is obviously older than Christopher Reeve.
Yeah. And that I have heard that exact same thing. Okay.
Like it just like I want to get out of Smallville as much as possible because it just depresses me.
Yeah, and they're going for a pastiche, and I get that. The problem is the pastiche they're going for is from when Superman came out, not what makes sense narratively.
Right.
Like they're going for a pastiche of 1938. And it may be that it was meant to be 38 and 48 is dubbed.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know if it's 80 yard. I don't know. Either way, whether it's 1966 or 1956, well, no, I guess Smallville, America would look like that in 56, 57. I could see that.
I could totally see it looking that way. And I always thought that it was 38 based on the opening that takes off from the Daily Planet going out into space.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah,
landed in 1948.
Yeah.
Like, the problem is that the way that line is presented, it makes it sound like Clark told Lois in the interview that he landed on Earth in 1948.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Another change I would do is to have some Superman stuff.
Yeah. Some Superman stuff. Not just the montage of saves immediately after the helicopter.
Yeah.
Like some more stuff.
Yeah, like I don't know. It's just you hit the nail on the head way back. Superman's a man of action, but not for most of this movie.
No, not for most of this movie. But he does act in this movie. That is what we call a setup, folks. I'm making sure to point out that he is a man of action in 1978, so that when we talk about a movie from 2016, I can point out that he doesn't do a goddamn thing. And that bothers me. We'll get there.
You'll
Yeah.
believe that Superman has a bad father.
You'll believe Superman won't say a fucking word to defend himself when he's accused of mass murder. Ah, Batman v Superman. Wave your fist. We're gonna have to have a talk with you, my friend. All right. Here's what I would do. I would rearrange the film structurally. I'd start in Smallville. I'd start with the pod crashing. Glenn
A la
Ford and
Smallville.
a la Smallville. Um, uh, Jonathan and Martha finding him as a baby. Have the scene where he lifts the car. Everybody loves the scene where he lifts the car. It's fucking great. And then I'd move through to the death of Jonathan Kent. Clark feeling the call to leave. And then going out searching, finding the Arctic, throwing the crystal. I'd trim a few things here and there. Few things. But I feel like it's paced better if it starts there. Right? If that's your opening act, I think Smallville works a little bit better.
Well, also, you can also do it this way because you're not trying to set up Superman 2, which was the intent of
Right.
Krypton. Like,
Well,
Krypton serves no
I'm not going to
purpose.
omit Krypton.
Yeah.
Krypton still serves a purpose, and I'm still going to put it there. Significantly less of it would be my change. But I would have it as a flashback once he gets in the fortress
Okay.
and is behind the little crystals. And, and Jor-El is talking to him. Fade through as Jor-El is narrating the same thing that we saw at the beginning of the actual movie. So we don't get that piece of information twice. Right? Have
Yeah.
him narrate through it, and then we have the scene. Right? And we significantly trimmed so that we have a transition from Jeff East, who plays young Clark, to Christopher Reeve. That isn't just this meandering shot of crystal face, Jor-El.
Yeah.
Because that's honestly one of the places where I drift as a fan. Right? Like, I love this movie, and in that sequence, I'm just like, oh, God,
That's
get it over
that's
with.
that's why I can't get out of the Fortress of
Yeah,
Solitude.
100%. But if that same piece of information, all of that stuff that's there, is the stuff from the beginning of the movie, just the same information twice, and we see the pod launch and a little bit of the narration that Jor-El gives to young Clark and gives to training Clark. Take the pertinent bit, cut that. That's what we keep. Then we get back to the Fortress of Solitude and he's Superman. Right? So that it all ties together and then we have him as Supes. And I'd go the opposite route from you. Well, not the opposite route. I would have more Superman stuff. I would have more Clark. I would have Clark working on the story of the disappearance of this dead cop.
Okay.
All right, I would have that be his city beat. That'd be his first story. And I would have that lead Clark to discovering more about Lex Luthor. I would also have Lois working on the California land deal because that gets thrown at us,
Yes.
right? When Clark goes to, oh, where's Lois today? I would have her researching that. I would have her working that. so that they're both looking at Lex Luthor from two different angles. And that way it feels intentional. It feels like it's set up. It doesn't feel like it's a hard left turn at the beginning of the third act of the movie, which is what it really is. But yeah, I would have more Clark working a story. While Lois is working her story and the two parallel working toward Lex Luthor, I would have Lex Luthor test Superman a couple of different ways. But I wouldn't have him reveal himself until basically the same point in the film. Like, I would have Lex do things to observe Superman.
Yeah.
Find out about him. And I would have Clark get close to uncovering Lex, but not actually doing it until, no creature with more than two legs can hear this frequency, Superman. Because who wouldn't want more opportunities for Gene Hackman to be Gene Hackman? But yeah, that would be. I would restructure the first two segments of the film, and I would give a little more screen time for Clark Kent, particularly because so much is done with introducing him as Clark when he shows up at the Daily Planet.
Yeah.
And
he's
then,
the fastest typist I've ever seen.
Right?
Well, yeah, because he types at super speed. How did you miss this, Perry?
Right. Let me guess. He sends money to his white-haired mother. Actually, she's silver-haired. Right? Like, there's something so earnest and real about the way Clark is being positioned. And then the second he saves Lois, we never see that Clark again.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I love the distinction between the two, between Clark and Superman. And I love that in Superman 2 we get more of it. But once we see Superman, we see him as a caricature of himself when he comes to pick up Lois. Well, let's push off. That's not the same guy that fainted from a bullet.
Right.
So I would be more consistent with Clark. But other than that, other than making it a cohesive story with a beginning, a middle, and an end that is important in the 1978 portion of the story, there's not much I would do.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a technically perfect movie. Even the things I don't like, I like.
I understand. Like, same can be said for Rocky, because there's no antagonist.
Nope. But at least there's a through line for Rocky.
Yes.
Right? Like, Apollo Creed is a through line for Rocky the entire time. Lex becomes a problem for Superman at the end of the movie.
Yeah.
I would, and this is maybe my 2025 sensibility. I would maybe cut the whole not the whole. I would definitely trim back some of the Lex, Otis, and Ms. Tessmacher rewriting the code on the fucking missiles.
Yeah, that was 1978 hijinks right there.
But the whole Larry Hagman scene would be gone. It would just be gone.
Yeah.
It was cringe far before 2025.
I mean, I did like that he was a major.
Yeah, sure. I would also trim out a fuck ton, and I mean a fuck ton of Otis. Like, Ned Beatty, I don't know who you bribed to be in this movie. But I think Richard Lester did the right thing.
And leaving him
in
in
not
prison.
inviting you back for Superman 2. Leaving it just be Valerie Perrine as the sort of torchbearer for the film. Well, actually, no, I don't think he made that choice. I think that was probably because of the shooting schedule that he's not in the sequel. Because Hackman shot no extra footage for Lester's Superman 2. All the Hackman footage was shot by Dick Donner. So the fact that he's with Miss Tessmacher means it was always intended Lex and Miss Tessmacher.
Okay.
In the fucking... I can't wait to try to untangle the Gordian knot that is Superman 2 with this concept of what would you do different. Because I would do a lot different with Superman 2, and yet I would do nothing different with Superman 2. Right? Like, structurally, I want the same movie, but there are little, tiny little things I want to cut. Lots of them. Okay, cool. Well, I think the only thing left to do, other than tease what we're doing next time, which is we've just talked about it, is Superman 2, is to sort of, I don't know, final thoughts on Superman the movie.
Superman the movie is one of the cornerstone movies of child me. Like I exist in this weird hodgepodge triangle of Superman the movie, Star Wars, and the Wizard of Oz.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%.
Like,
agreed. Same. Well, I mean, we grew up in the same house, so that's why it makes sense.
Yeah, but like this movie has, while not having structure, this movie has everything.
Yeah.
It has romance. It has Superman. It has wooden Marlon Brando and Gene Hackman chewing the hell out of every scenery they put him in front of.
Yeah.
In such a way that people who have seen Lex Luthor in previous iterations, people who have read comic books go, I don't
I don't know who that is.
I mean, I like Gene Hackman, but that's not Lex Luthor.
You want to see a long arm?
I
see a very long arm. Like Lex Luthor would never do that.
Exactly.
Never it's like Otis bragging about it.
I like. I mean, note for note, this thing is also followed with Batman, in that I've seen the Joker. I've read the Joker. Jack Nicholson is not the Joker. But I like Jack Nicholson Joker.
Yeah.
I like Gene Hackman Lex Luthor. More so in Superman 2, because like he gets to, I don't know, his scenes with Zod like trump anything he does with Superman.
Absolutely, that's true.
But this movie, like, I can't watch it often because like, you know, I wear contacts.
Mm-hmm.
And you're not supposed to sleep in your contacts.
Like, there are people who are going to see the fact that we both admitted that this movie puts us to sleep as criticism of this film, and it is definitely not intended that way.
It is not. There's also
it's like a comfort food.
It's also like, maybe, and this is just something that I haven't done in a long time. Maybe I should start Superman while the sun is in the sky.
Maybe. That's probably a good idea.
Maybe I shouldn't start it at midnight.
No, I don't think so. But I think it is also because it is like a warm blanket. It is one of the three movies from my childhood that I watched the most often, and I don't think it's a stretch to say that the movies I've watched most in my entire life, Superman is probably at the toward the top of the list. Um, Star Wars, Superman, Empire, like those are the movies that I watched over and over as a kid because those are the movies we had taped on VHS,
The beta.
beta, and then on VHS.
Yeah.
Um, and like I would come home, the family story, uh, rooted in truth. I have memories of this. Is that I would come home from pre-K and pre-K, and I would put in Star Wars, and I'd watch Star Wars while Mom made lunch. It wasn't always Star Wars. Sometimes it was Superman. Right? That's the part that when we do the little family retelling of the story, we omit. Sometimes it was Superman.
See, I don't actually
Oftentimes,
believe it. I don't believe any of this happened because the
because you
movies
were
were
at
done by the time I
school.
got home from school.
Um, yeah, but yeah, it was Superman and Star Wars. And it's like a cozy blanket that you wrap yourself up in and fall asleep. Uh, Same with Empire Strikes Back, man. I can't get off of Hoth. It just it's the way it is. So it's not a criticism. Um, okay. So was there anything else you wanted to add to your final thoughts? Or was that it?
That is it. Like I cannot speak to this movie enough, but I can't actually speak to this movie
Right.
in terms without going into the history of me, without going into what comics mean to me, without going into what movies and comics and how like this book ends with Batman in so many ways. Like there are four comic book movies that dictate everything that is on film today.
Mm-hmm.
They are in this particular order. And oddly enough, this is also the order of release.
Yeah.
They are Superman, Batman, X-Men, and the Amazing Spider-Man. No, sorry, Spider-Man.
Spider-Man
The
or Spider-Man 2?
the first one
Okay.
because it sets everything up in ways
It
that
does.
takes the Superman story and takes it. It's like, hey, have some structure. Hey, let's take the myth and put Spider-Man in it, fusing film and comics.
Yeah.
These four movies encapsulate so much of comics on film that these are the comic book movies and everything. Sure, if you want to say that Avengers Endgame is better than the X-Men, yes, it is, but it is not as important as the X-Men.
Sure. Exactly.
And like I said, if I can't talk about this movie without getting inside baseball.
Yeah. Yeah. And there will be plenty of opportunities to get more inside baseball on this and the franchise and Superman as a character. Particularly as I transition into my final thoughts. Superman means a lot to me personally. I know I am a little bit more of a Superman fan writ large than you are.
Yes.
And it's because of this movie, right? Like, that's my lifelong connection with the character begins with this film, with Christopher Reeve's Superman. And Superman has been a a constant in my life, my fandom and my love of the character. Uh, and I have always been able to connect with a version of Superman that resonates with me, and it is a gift that is given to me by this movie, right? And part of the reason, and I teasers, part of the reason Tyler Hoechlin is able to become my Superman in Superman and Lois is because Superman became a dad on TV literally a week after I found out I was going to be a dad. Like there's resonance there, and that character deeply important to me, and he wouldn't be without this movie and Christopher Reeve. So Christopher Reeve gets, a bump up above all other Superman because I will always have sort of a blind spot for my love of Chris Reeve Superman. And I think that's that love of Superman and that love of Christopher Reeve Superman is a wonderful place for us to call it tonight and move forward and say thank you all for joining us and listening to our rambling return. I don't know if that was as cogent and as planned as some of our former horror podcasts were. But we will get a hang of this, and we will get back to being the Brothers Blanchard who deep dive on horror and non-horror movies. So thank you for joining us. We are and we remain the Brothers Blanchard. I am Matthew Blanchard.
I'm Patrick Blanchard.
And we are still the podcast that pays the late fees
so you don't have to.